Today, Bitcoin takes yet another turn lower, sinking to half the value of its recent all-time high as the FBI manages to track down and retrieve a portion of the Colonial Pipeline's crypto ransom payment. Plus, call it Inflation Nation. Small businesses are raising prices to keep up, and one bank says current conditions are setting up a global time bomb. And finally, Wendy's appears to become one of the newest meme stocks as shares soar and the fast food chain gains popularity on Reddit. I'm Pippa Stevens, and this is CNBC After Hours. Stocks are mixed today as the Dow and S&P close largely flat, although the S&P is just inches away from a new record close. The Nasdaq was the outperformer, closing at the highest level since April. Bitcoin, meanwhile, sank today. The world's largest cryptocurrency fell about 10% in the past 24 hours. It's the latest turn lower in the digital currency's decline since hitting an all-time high in April. In the past month, Bitcoin prices have plummeted roughly 45%. Today's slide comes as the FBI recovered a portion of the nearly $5 million ransom that Colonial Pipeline paid to hackers that shut down their pipeline last month. So why is this relevant to the price of Bitcoin? Well, Colonial paid the hackers in Bitcoin, which is supposed to operate outside the control of any government, but the FBI was still able to retrieve it. MacKenzie Sigalos explains.
So Bitcoin is down over 10% in the last 24 hours, and it's always difficult to ascribe price moves to any one thing. But the drop may be related to concerns over Bitcoin's security after U.S. officials were able to recover most of the ransom paid to Darkside, which is that criminal gang that targeted Colonial Pipeline. Court documents show that investigators were able to access the private key or password for one of the hackers' Bitcoin wallets. Now, the money was then recovered by a new DC task force recently launched by the Justice Department. So for years, Bitcoin has been the currency of choice for hackers carrying out ransomware attacks, in part because of the anonymity that it offers users and the fact that funds in digital wallets can only be accessed with a complex digital key. So what's unsettling for some people is that it's unclear how the government got its hands on that private key. But there is potentially a silver lining here. Now, for some investors on the institutional side, the retrieval of Bitcoin from hackers indicates that Bitcoin can be regulated. And they want Bitcoin to become more mainstream, and that could help in this effort. At the very least, it certainly sets up a good debate around the question of how to regulate Bitcoin. What's fascinating is that we're seeing all of this price action this week, days after El Salvador announced that it was introducing legislation to become the first country to offer Bitcoin as legal tender. So it's not just Bitcoin feeling the pain. Both Ethereum and the meme-inspired Dogecoin are down roughly 14% in the last 24 hours. Other digital coins like XRP and Litecoin are also tanking. And these other altcoins, so any cryptocurrency that isn't Bitcoin, seems to be taking their cues from the movement of Bitcoin, which is the world's biggest cryptocurrency. Now, while we are seeing big price drops, the thing to keep in mind here is that this comes after a precipitous rise in most of these coins, so some of them are still up for the year.
Okay, let's get to our sound check. Here's a roundup of the day's biggest action and what the top newsmakers and business leaders had to say across CNBC's airwaves.
I'm amazed. I mean, you take a look at sort of what's happened in a number of those companies and the value of those companies. AMC is a great example. It's just moved up. And you look at what those companies are making relative to the value, and it makes no sense. But I'm not going to fight it, so therefore we're not going to get involved in it.
I'm very familiar of the rules of engagement in Ireland. Ireland, coming out of the pandemic, is in a unique situation. It's still a member of the EU, yet it's beside the largest financial market in Europe, which is London. It's a perfect place to be. They do not have a 15% minimum corporate tax rate, and they never will, because their advantage in terms of getting domiciled companies there and nexuses of a lot of digital servers, et cetera, is extremely high.
Look, everything sounded good. I don't think it ultimately changes investor opinions. The developers conference is really for developers. The keynote highlights some improvement that Apple has developed over the last year. And look, I think there's incremental functionality. I'm not sure we're going to get someone switching from Android to Apple as a result of new features launched yesterday.
Look, like this isn't new, right? Second Life has been around. There's been a lot of different avatars historically around in the past. The difference this time is that 20 years ago, avatars were considered for an underground audience. But at that time, gaming was considered niche and underground as well. Everything's been flipped on its head. Gaming is now cool. Avatars are a prerequisite for anything that you want to do in life.
Inflation fears continue to grow as commodity prices rise. Oil, gas, food, even coffee prices are jumping higher, and it's taking a toll on small businesses. This morning, the National Federation of Independent Business released its May report in which the organization's chief economist put things plainly. He wrote that inflation is running rampant on Main Street. The share of small business owners raising their average selling prices rose to the highest level in 40 years. The Federal Reserve isn't worried. They say this is all temporary. But not everyone agrees. This week, Deutsche Bank issued a grave warning, predicting inflation could lead to a global crisis in the years to come. Jeff Cox explains.
The inflation story, unfortunately, continues. We're seeing it in a number of areas, really across the entire economy. It's especially concentrated right now in those food and energy prices, but input prices are up. And when we talk about input prices, we're talking about the things that the goods that make the things that we buy. So where we are right now with inflation is we're talking about inflation that's somewhere, depending on what your favorite gauge is, in the 3 to 4% range. We'll find out more about that this week when the CPI numbers are released. But that is considerably higher than anything that we've seen going back at least to the financial crisis and before that. So you would think that this is the kind of thing that really has policymakers, particularly at the Federal Reserve, but also in the halls of Congress, really standing up and taking notice. It's like, holy cow, we're seeing all these terrible inflationary pressures. But amazingly, it's not. And the reason for that is that the Fed still sees all of this as transitory. There are some who disagree. Most notably this week, Deutsche Bank came out with a rather lengthy note about where they think inflation is going, and they see it as being basically this hidden tiger right now that's ready to come back out and bite the economy. So Deutsche used this one particular phrase in the note that was especially terrifying, and they called it a potential global time bomb of inflation that's ready to go off out there. That gets to the important question of how long is this inflation going to take to develop? Is this a thing that's going to be just the 2021 phenomenon? Deutsche actually thinks that the worst of it could come around 2023. So it's this thing that's ticking. And the reason why it keeps ticking is that we're continuing to do things that keep feeding into inflation. When I talk to my contacts, when I look at the things that really hit home with our readers, inflation is a huge thing now. So Deutsche is worried that, hey, if we continue down this road, and especially with the Fed keeping so much accommodation in place, keeping interest rates anchored near zero, buying $120 billion of bonds a month, the federal government spending over $5 trillion and wanting to spend a couple trillion more on infrastructure. All of these things help keep more money going into the system, and that helps create inflation. All these elements are out there, and it could very well be that we have a completely different conversation come the fall. But right now, there are some strong and growing concerns about inflation that I think we all need to pay attention to.
Okay, let's get to today's numbers round. We'll start with 20. Shares of Wendy's surged roughly 20% higher in today's trading as the fast food chain appears to be one of the latest targets of Reddit day traders. According to data from YOLOstocks.live, a site that tracks stock mentions on Reddit, Wendy's is now the 6th most discussed stock. But Wendy's is a little bit of a different story than meme stocks like AMC or GameStop. Most notably, it doesn't have the same level of short interest or traders betting on the company to fail. Quite the opposite. The hedge fund Tryon has a 12% stake in Wendy's, which just reported better than expected earnings and raised its full year forecast. Next, 7. From one meme stock to another, 7 AMC insiders have sold a portion of their stake in the movie theater chain since May 28th, which is when the latest Reddit-fueled retail rally began. Shares are more than 100% higher since then. A total of 9 insiders have sold stock during this quarter, and 3 cashed in on the rally back in the first quarter. That compares to 0 insiders selling shares in all of 2020. We should note, though, that CEO Adam Aron has never sold any portion of his stake in the company. And finally, 20,000. Ford unveiled its new Maverick truck earlier today, the country's first pickup with a hybrid engine. And when it goes on sale later this year, the base model will cost as little as $20,000. The Maverick will be the smallest vehicle in Ford's highly lucrative truck lineup, and the company expects it to appeal to both new and loyal pickup buyers alike. The unveiling comes a few weeks after Ford debuted its fully electric F-150 Lightning. Get all the details on Ford's efforts in the EV space by going to CNBC.com and downloading the CNBC app. That's it for After Hours. We'll be back here in our home office every Tuesday and Thursday, so be sure to catch us then.